Welcome to Meaningful Tutorials. Today we will look at strings, vectors, and data frames in R or Rstudio. So, in the first part of our tutorial, we shall look at the different ways of writing strings. There are actually 4 different ways of writing strings, so we will look at each and every one of them, and after which we will look at strings, vectors, and data frames. In other words, how do we combine strings, or how do we concatenate strings to form character vectors, and how do we combine character vectors maybe with other vectors like numeric vectors to form, for instance, data frames. So basically the first part of this video or this tutorial on strings, vectors, and data frames will be based on this. And in the second part, we shall be looking at how to convert character strings or just any variable at all in your data frame or your data set that you've imported into R into a factor or numeric format, and vice versa. For instance, how do we sometimes when we read data into R, or maybe even when we even write or enter a data frame on our own, we might be interested in converting, for instance, characters into, or character strings into factors, and vice versa. Or we might sometimes, when we read data using read.table or read.csv or any of the data reading commands, what happens is that R may not be able to recognize a numeric variable as a numeric variable. It might recognize a numeric variable as a character, and you would have to convert it back into numeric format. So we will look at all these things, and we also look at, in the third part of the tutorial, we shall look at how to set the quote argument when reading data into R using the read.table or the read.csv functions or function. And then we would also look at finally, in the fourth part of our tutorial on strings, vectors, and data frames, we will look at how to also set the stringsAsFactors arguments in the read.table or read.csv function when reading data into R. So without speaking much, let's start with the first part of our video, which has to do with how to write a string. First of all, you would ask me, what is a string? A string in R simply represents or denotes a character. When we talk of a character, it's any letter between or from A to Z is a character. So it could be a character, a single character, or a group of characters. In other words, a word, for instance. So I could say B is a character, boy is a group of words, and that becomes what? Another character. A group of characters. That is a word. So now when the challenge comes when we are about to write characters in R. Unlike numeric entities like numbers, all we have to do is just write. If I write 2, for instance, in the console, should I write 2 and hit enter? R gives me 2. But if I should write B and hit enter, R gives me an error. Why? Simply because B, as a character, is supposed to be entered as a string. So with that being said, what is a string? A string is simply a character or a group of characters. There is a word that is enclosed by quotations. And quotations here could be match quotations, that is double quotations, or single quotations or simple quotations. For instance, you realize that R gave me an error when I just wrote B and hit enter. What if I should write B in quotations and hit enter? R hasn't given me an error. This is how we write how we write strings. So right now B in quotations is no longer a character, but is a string character if you want to. I mean, or you could call it a character string, or could just call it now a string. It's no longer a character. You could call it a character string for that matter. So R would prefer writing B in quotations to writing B just like that, because when we did, it gave us an error. R works with strings when it comes to writing characters. So this is the first way of writing characters. It's by the use of what? Double quotations. So this, we could write a single character just like B in double quotations, and we could also write, multiple characters or a group of characters, that's a word in quotations. So for instance, if I want to write boy and I just write boy and hit enter, R gives me an error. But if I should write boys or boy in quotations and I hit enter, R hasn't given me an error. So boy here represents a string. So whether a single character or a multiple characters, the first method that we've seen has to do with entering what? Entering strings using double quotations. Now let's look at how to enter strings using double quotations. I've zoomed for it for the console to be clear right now. So if the first method, like I said, has to deal with or has to do with using single quotations. So if I write B or A and hit enter, it gives me an error. However, if I should write A in quotations, A is a string and R is cool with it. So A in quotations is called a string and no longer just an ordinary character. So, or you could call it a character string. If I want to write, I think my explanation is clear. If I want to write girls, if I write girls, which is a group of characters, if I hit enter, it gives me an error. However, if I should write girls in quotations and hit enter, it doesn't give me an error. So this is how we write strings using double quotations. To write strings using single quotations, all you have to do is just open apostrophe like this before and after, and then you just write that's single quotations. You just write what you want. For instance, B, I hit enter. It's the same thing as writing B using you see that even the response comes with B in double quotations. By default, it uses double quotations. However, you can use single quotations. If I also want boys, I can do the same thing. Boys in single quotations, sorry. So boys, if I hit enter, it works perfectly. So this is the first method of writing strings, be it using single quotations or matched or double quotations. Now let's look at the second way of writing strings. This second way of writing strings has to do with when we want to write strings that already contain quotations in them. For instance, if I want to say the boys play yard, so if I write the boys play yard, the boys, or the boys playground, okay, so let me say the boys, I don't know what to write. I don't know. I think there's a problem with it. So let's say the boys, okay, the boys playground. Okay, when we look at the boys playground here, what can we say about it? Let me say the boys playground. So I can decide to write boys in quotations. So for instance, when we look at the boys playground, just as is written here, if I should hit enter, R will give me an error. Why? Simply because like simply because, sorry for the interruption anyway, simply because not all the characters, or what should I say, not all the characters are enclosed by what we call the quotations. For instance, we just quoted only boys. So if I should hit enter, arrow can, this is not a string right here, this remains a what we call it, this remains a group of characters. So if I should hit enter, arrow give me an error. So now the question is, when we are writing strings, or how do we write strings that already have quotations in them? So to write a string that already has something within it that has a quotation, maybe a word or something, then what we have to do is that there are two conditions. If the quotations within the string, sorry, not the string, if the quotations within the group of characters, which is just this simple sentence or phrase here, if the quotations within it are simple or single quotations, then what that means is that we have to enclose the group, this sentence or this phrase by double quotations. And if the quotations that are within the group of characters, or the particular phrase that we want to write as a string are double quotations, then we have to enclose it with single quotations. So it's the opposite. So now in our case, in the first example, the boys playground, what happens? We realize we kept the quotation, the boys playground, we kept boys in single quotations. So to write this as a string, we have to enclose the whole thing with double quotations. So we have to write the boys, the boys, playground, okay. And now we have to close the quotation, the double quotation. So we have to enclose everything in double quotations. If I should hit enter, arrow hasn't given us an error, you see. Now let's look at the other way around. When we are trying to write to write a string from a group of characters in which we have some characters, or let's say enclosed by, let's say, double quotations. So if let's take another example, or in this case, if we have the boys playground here, the boys playground, however, boys here is in double quotations, playground, okay. Now if I should hit enter, the same way arrow will give me an error. Why? Simply because not all the characters, this group of characters is not enclosed, fully enclosed by what? Quotations. So if I should hit enter, it gives me an error. But if I want to write something like this as a string, then I have to enclose the boys playground with single quotations. So it's the opposite. So I have to write single quotations, then I'll write the boys playground, okay, sorry. And if I should hit enter, R hasn't given us an error. Okay, so this marks the first part of our tutorial on how to write strings. Hope my explanation was clear on how to write strings. Why is this so important? This would help us when we are using the quote, when we are trying to use the quote argument in read.csv or read.table in an attempt to read data into R. By default, we don't usually use it, but it's very important. But for you to be able to use the quote argument, you should have a clear understanding of strings and how to write strings. Okay, so now let's move on to, we finish with writing strings, and that is impressive. Right now we will look at how to actually, I hope it's clear. So we finished looking at the 4 different ways of writing strings using single or double quotations, and now we will look at how to this one, how do we combine sorry, what am I doing? Now we will look at how do we combine strings or character strings for that matter to obtain character vectors, and how do we also combine, let's say, character vectors with other forms of vectors or just only character vectors to obtain data frames. Okay, so let's start. Okay, now that we've looked at how to, we've already looked at how to write strings, and that's impressive. So now let's look at how do we write our, let me repeat the same thing here. I'll try to write okay, now for us to obtain, let's say, a character vector by definition would be a combination of, or the concatenation of, a group of strings. So let's do that. For instance, so I could say, for instance, student here is just an object that I'm using to denote our vector. Let me zoom for it to be clear. Okay, so I'm writing a vector and I'm calling this vector student is equal to, and I'll concatenate, use the C to concatenate. And now let's have some names of students. So we could have, for instance, Amma. So you see that when I'm writing Amma, it's a name of a person, so I have to put it in what? Quotations. So Amma right here becomes a string. This is the first string, then I write comma, let me write another string, Alice. Alice is also another name of a person, and then I'll write comma, let me write Sandong, for instance. It's the name of another person. Should we end it here? I think it's okay. Okay, so let's end it here. Now let's write another string. So this as you can see is what we call a vector, a character vector, for instance, for that matter, because it contains what? Characters. Or you could also call it a string vector because it contains strings. Alice is a string, Amma is a string, Sandong is a string. Okay, with that being said, let's move on. Now let's write another vector, and in this particular vector we would call it, let's say, max. So let's say max, we've written students, then the max of the students, max. And for this one we will concatenate. For instance, Amma had, the exam is over 100, and then Amma had, for instance, 50%, or let's give her 40%. No, Amma had 70%, for instance. And then Alice had, let's say, 50%, 50%, and then let's put a third person if possible. Let me try to, like, we can add another person so that so let me put 4th person to be, let's say, Ali. Okay, I think it's better this way. So we have Ali. So let's say Alice had, let's say, 40%, or maybe, I don't know, we could give let's give Alice 40%, for instance. And then we pick Sandong had, let's say, 20%, and then Ali had, let's say, 80%, or maybe 65%. Okay, so as you can see here, we finish entering our data, And now this is what we term as marks here. That's for the interruption. Sorry, I'm so sorry for that. Okay, so now let's move on. We've finished with this particular, I don't know, I think I had so many marks here. Normally we have 4 people. Amma had 70, Alice had 50, Sandong had 20. Okay, let's assume that Sandong had 40 instead of 20. So let me okay, so now 4 is okay. And now we move on to, let's say assessment. I just write assessment. I'm just writing anything. Sorry, assessment. Okay, now assessment is another vector that we are like, it's another vector, and then in this particular vector we'll be evaluating, or we'll be interpreting the results. 70 means pass, so let's just write pass as a string. So pass. When you get, let's say 50 is pass. When you get 40, you failed. Okay, fellow has passed. Failed. And the last person had 65, so 65, she has passed. Ali had 65, passed. Okay, now after doing this, so we have how many vectors? We have 3 vectors. The first one is a string, a string vector. If you want, it's a vector that is composed of several strings, as well as the third one. But this second one, which has to do with the marks, is a numeric vector. So let's see, how do we combine these 3 vectors into a data frame? So let's quickly do that. Right now, let me execute all these. So I simply select them. You select all these 3 vectors and just click on run to execute. Okay, now let's see the results. Why has it given me an error? Oh, sorry, I didn't concatenate this. That's why. You realize that in writing this string I made a mistake. I didn't concatenate it, so I was supposed to put C to concatenate it. So if I should hit on run, now everything is perfect. Or if you want, we can select everything again, then hit on run. Okay, we select everything, then we just click on run. Okay, and everything is perfect. There's no any error, everything is perfect. And right now, if I want to see students, just click on students here and click, and then I have the names of students here. If I click on marks, it will give me this particular vector here, marks, and these are the assessments. So now the question is, how do we combine all these into a data frame? Mind you, when you are combining vectors into a data frame, the vectors must have equal length. So in our case, we have 4 people, 4 marks, 4 evaluations of assessments, so that's okay. Now, if we want to convert this into a data frame, all we have to do is to use the data frame command. So I can say, for instance, let's say data frame, let's call it our data set. So I can say data. A data frame is simply a combination of vectors, of equal length. So if I should say data frame here, we use the data frame command, data.frame. Okay, and then into brackets, what will I write? I will simply write, since I've already entered the vectors, I'll just write the names of the vectors. So the names of the vectors, we have what? Students. Okay, here it is, comma. The next is marks. Okay, the last is what? Assessments. You write it as you've written it, assessment. And there's no space, so I can hit enter and come down and come and write comma. And then there is something important here that I'm going to show you. Right now, the question that we have to ask ourselves is, do we want, for instance, these strings here, for instance, Ama, Kojo, the strings here, Ama, Kojo for the names, or the strings here which are passed, failed, do we want them to be considered as factors? When we talk of factors, that is categorical variables. For categorical variable, when we talk of categorical variable, it's a qualitative variable that has predefined responses. Like sex is a categorical variable, so it's either a male or a female. This we term as the responses or the strings here, which is male or female. These strings are termed as factors because they are predefined and it's categorical. You are either male or you are female, or maybe transsex. Then we could also have, let's say, what we term as a character. For a character, what that means is that a factor can be considered as a character, but a character cannot be considered as a factor by definition. A character is any of these strings here is capable of being called what? A character, because it's a group of letters. So when we pick students, the student is not categorical. For instance, if we should go to class of students, a different school, the class of students will be different. However, when we talk of sex, anywhere at all we go is categorical. You are either male or female. So students, there is an option that allows us to define our strings as either categorical, that is as either factors or what? Characters. So we use the command called stringsAsFactors. So we say strings. You see, stringsAsFactors is equal to, if I should say false, then what that means is that it will consider all these strings here as factors. If I should say it's equal to true, it will consider them as characters. They are just characters. But if I should say it's equal to true, it will consider all strings as what? Factors. Okay, string simply here, we are referring to anything at all that is in quotations. All the characters or group of characters that are in quotations are called strings. So we are converting them into factors. As I explained, factors here means it's categorical. So under normal circumstances, students is not categorical. Like I said, if I should go to a different school, the names will differ. But when I pick assessment, it's either the student has passed or failed. So that one is a factor. But by default, we can choose to convert everything into what? We can choose to set everything to be factor or everything to character. Then after which we can select and choose those particular vectors that we wish to convert either to factors or to characters. So for the meantime, we can just say stringsAsFactors is equal to false. If I should say so, then what that means is that it will consider all these as what? Characters. So let me select everything and then hit on run. Okay. Now, when I hit on run, it's perfect. You see, it doesn't give me any error here. It's perfect. And now, if I should say print data, here's our data frame. You see it. So we have the students, the marks, and then the assessment.